the Australians are going to the polls this Saturday. Are they going to swing to the left like Canada has just done, or are they going to swing to the right like the US did last November? To talk about this and all the topics that they're discussing in Australia at the moment is Wendy Francis, our Australian correspondent. How are you, Wendy?
I'm very well, Bob, and I'm always glad to talk to you. You're one of my favourite New Zealanders.
You obviously haven't got many New Zealand friends. I feel sorry for you Australians because you've got the state elections and then you've got the federal election across the whole of Australia. So it seems like Australia is constantly in campaign mode. So it's interesting to watch from here in New Zealand.
Yeah, look, it does feel like that. And our states, it's also confusing as well because the states oversee some legislation and federal things are slightly
Mm,
different. So that can be confusing for people too. Something like education is mainly state-based, but then there are
mm,
aspects of it that are federal. And the same for our health. Aspects of that are state, but then aspects are federal. So it can be really confusing for people when they approach like a federal election. What sort of questions am I asking these federal candidates? Because what are they actually going to oversee, and what
mm.
is actually state-based? So it can be confusing for people.
Okay, and also you've got the single transferable voting system, haven't you?
So it's preferential. So is that
Preferential.
what you're meaning?
Yeah,
Yeah. So a
yeah.
preferential voting system, and the fact is that we have a green form and a white form. The white form is like 2 feet long. I'm talking in old language, but 2 feet long. The green form is just like a small DL, but
Yeah.
the in the green form you must mark every box, otherwise it's invalid. So that
Wow.
again is a problem because a lot of people just want to put a one, but if they
Mm,
don't mark every box, it's invalid. On the white form, there's an above the line. You can vote six people, six parties above the line, or you can vote 12 below, or you can do the whole thing below. So again, there's just this confusion, and I don't think that we're well educated on even what our Senate is or our House of
mm,
Representatives. And there's a lot of people in Australia who really don't care enough to
mm.
even find out.
Well, some New Zealanders have a trouble just turning up to the polling booth, let alone figuring out how to fill in a form that big. But I do like the system because of the fact that, and I would like to see it in New Zealand because it means that if your first vote doesn't count because the party doesn't make it in, you then have a second shot and a third shot. And, we have a problem with a wasted vote in New Zealand. So I actually like the system. But anyway, look, let's get into, I'm keen to just find out some of the topics that perhaps we're more concerned about, and then what the general narrative has been around for the parties. So, look, can we just touch on a few? Firstly, the whole gender issue, the male female. I know there's been a recent case in Sydney, Salgrover, where the court came out and said actually uh, women can be trans, or trans women can be women. So, has that been a big talking point in this election?
Look, they have successfully tried to keep it out of the talking points. So the major parties, don't want to talk about it, and unfortunately, the media doesn't want to talk about it either because they're pretty left leaning. So it's convenient for the major parties for the media not to be asking them these questions, but the minor parties are really talking about it. Minor parties
Right.
such as Family First, obviously different to your Family First in
Mm,
because ours is a political party,
sort
but like One Nation, even the Trumpet of Patriots, which is Clive Palmer, which is a really unusual name that's come up too.
What's it called?
But they Trumpet of Patriots, and it is a play on Trump. So he has called it the Trumpet of Patriots. So
Ah,
he used to be the United Australia Party, and he's renamed his party the Trumpet of Patriots. So the minor parties are talking about this gender issue and the whole what is a woman, but the major parties are successfully burying that way down deep. There is a federal
mm,
inquiry that was started, but when the election happens, all the inquiries become sort of null and void. So we would be hopeful that a new inquiry will start after this federal election. And we would be hopeful that the parameters around this inquiry would be a lot better than what the Labor Party has put in at the moment. Because at the moment, the people who are even running the inquiry, it feels like it's very
mm.
biased again, towards a very left ideology.
Mm. Was there much reporting of the UK case the UK Supreme Court about definition of woman?
Very little, except
Mm.
again on social media. So social media is a great tool for politicians now because they can get their messages out, and so people like Lyle Shelton from the Family First Party, who many of your listeners would know about, he's been getting it out on social media. But again, it's just not a convenient narrative for the
Mm.
left. So anything that's not convenient is conveniently left out.
Yeah. One of the big topics coming into our last election 18 months ago was the whole relationship, sexuality education in schools. You've had the safe schools, those types of programs. Has there been discussion around that? Are parents exercised around what's happening in schools?
Very little, but interestingly, the rise in parents putting their children either into
Mm.
independent schools, mostly which are Christian, or doing homeschooling is just going through the roof. So it's almost like at 40% of children now are not in state school systems. It could even be higher with homeschooling. So people they're showing what they think of it by their feet. They are actually
Yeah.
moving out of the state system. But we had, as you say, we had safe schools. It morphed into respectful relationships. They keep on changing the name,
Oh, yes, they
but
do.
the
Yeah.
teaching is the same. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. What about, like I was thinking of the trifecta of topics like abortion, euthanasia, drugs. Has there been discussion around those types of tricky moral issues?
Again, the major parties have basically said we are not going to talk about abortion in the lead up to this election, and they've sort of put a taboo on it. In Queensland,
Mm.
where I live in Australia, the state premier David Crisafulli
Mm.
gagged the topic of abortion for 4 years in Parliament. So it's not actually allowed to be either discussed or debated in Parliament for 4 years. So they are frightened of the topic
Wow.
because there is a growing movement, particularly against this late term abortion. So in
Mm.
Australia, in every state and territory, it is legal to abort a baby up to birth for any reason.
Mm.
And
Mm.
that shocks everyday Australians. And
Yeah.
what's happening because of that, because of the increase in late term abortion, because if you tell somebody it's okay to do, they believe it. They think it's okay to do. If it's legal, it's okay.
Mm.
So what's happening is that the increase in late term abortions is increasing the number of babies that are being born alive following an abortion. And the statistics at the moment are around probably a little bit higher than 2 babies a week. 2 babies every week are surviving abortions, but in most states and territories, those babies cannot be given any medical assistance at all, not even palliative care. And
Mm.
so um, that is coming up a lot more, particularly in the minor parties. And
Mm.
federally, so that is a state issue, but federally, our Medicare is actually paying for the abortions. So my
Mm.
tax dollars are contributing to those abortions. It's shocking.
Mm.
So, and if you tell Australians that, they are shocked.
Mm.
So that is gaining momentum. But what's happening is that there is just this clamp down from up top saying we're not going to talk about this. This is a women's right. This is all of that
Mm.
blah blah.
Mm.
And so it's people like Dr. Joanna Howe who's really raising the issue
Yeah.
again on social media.
Yeah. What about euthanasia? Much debate around that?
Very little on euthanasia, but it's actually quite shocking what's happening in that area for us because it's mostly a state-based issue. But in all of these issues, just because it's a state-based issue doesn't mean that the federal government can't actually come in. I mean, for instance, with the late-term abortion and the babies born alive, one of our Senator Matt Canavan, put
Yeah.
forward a federal bill on that. So it can always be, approached from that aspect. But with euthanasia, the shocking thing for your listeners to hear in Australia is that what's happening in every state is that palliative care funding is being slashed,
Yep.
and at the same time, funding for euthanasia programs and euthanasia promotion is being increased. So, for instance, this is just an example, in New South Wales, just last year, the end of last year, palliative care funding was slashed by $150 million, and they increased the euthanasia funding by $97 million. So that's some absolute accurate stats. So when you decrease by 150 million in euthanasia and increase by 97 million in you decrease the palliative care, sorry, by
Yeah.
150 million, it's like, that's diabolical, because euthanasia is cheaper. So
Yeah.
the government is really looking at this, I think, from a cost benefit. It's shocking, because these are people's lives, and every life
Yeah.
from conception to end of life is valuable.
Mm. You could be our New Zealand correspondent, because this is all the same as in New Zealand. What about the cannabis debate, drugs debate? Has that been an issue?
Very little, because at the moment there's all these programs bringing legal cannabis to the fore. So there's all that debate going on about
Yeah.
how to access legal cannabis if it's needed, and all this sort of thing. So very little talk about drugs at the moment in Australia.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah. If anything, it's all about legalizing cannabis.
Yeah. Religious freedom, I know, has been a big issue, and I know that's sort of melded into the hate speech laws as well. I saw some commentary around Labor backing off a little bit about putting the pressure on Christian schools having to, or not being able to employ explicitly Christian staff. Has Labor backed off from kind of putting Christian schools under the pump?
They certainly haven't been speaking about it, because it was very unpopular. Because, as
Mm,
I say, it's almost 1 in 2 children that are going to an independent school. So parents are showing what they want by their feet. But the issue of religious freedom is probably our largest issue, particularly for people of faith in Australia. And whilst Christianity has declined in the number of people, it's still 1 in 2. So half of
mm,
Australians still
right.
ticked that they were
Mm,
Christian on the
mm,
census. And even then, it was really, it was way down on the list. And, I could talk about that for ages as well. But it's not just Christians, because it's also other faiths as well. So
mm,
around 70% of Australians would identify as being religious, but we have no religious freedom laws. And it has become more and more apparent that we desperately need them. So the sort of things that's happening in this area, and maybe it's the same in your nation as well, but um, things like, when you're talking about the gender ideology stuff,
mm,
conversion therapy has been made a criminal offence now. And when we're talking about conversion therapy, we're talking about just trying to say to a child, you are born
mm,
in your right body. You are not born in the wrong body. That is a completely wrong view of life. But so we now have laws in Queensland, in Victoria, in ACT, in South Australia, and in New South Wales. Now, New South Wales was the latest to bring in these laws. And this is what I want to bring about with the freedom of religion and conscience, is that in New South Wales now, it is illegal with a 4-year jail term. So it's
mm,
illegal to offer prayer or counselling to someone
mm,
who is feeling overwhelmed by unwanted sexual attractions or gender dysphoria.
mm,
Even if they ask for prayer, it is illegal. So you're breaking the law. So it's getting to the stage where you just have to really choose between God or man.
yeah.
Our federal parliament introduced the hate speech laws, as you just mentioned, Bob, and they seriously curtail our freedom of speech. So we're getting to the stage where these laws are so broad and so vague that many are recognising that they will create more problems than they solve. They brought them in under the pretense of, this is to stop anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
But the ridiculous thing is, when they talked about this is about stopping anti-Semitism, the the laws used to have protected attributes as race, religion, nationality, and political opinion. These laws, and that would have covered anti Semitism, these laws now include sex, sexual orientation, and gender. So
Yeah.
they've broadened what the laws actually address, and they changed some of the wording that they changed was intent to cause harm. So they removed intent to cause harm from the hate laws, and instead they put in the word recklessness. So who decides what's reckless? I mean, is it reckless to say now to your audience that there is only male and female? There are two genders, there are two sexes. Is that reckless? Some would say so. Some would say that it is reckless for me to say that abortion is not healthcare.
Mm,
So who decides what is reckless?
mm,
And is what I've just said hate speech? Well, in some people's minds, it would be. And then I will have to prove, if I've offended anybody now and somebody takes
mm,
offence, I then have to prove why I don't believe that that's hate speech. So the onus is on me then to
mm,
actually prove that that's not hate speech. So we're in a really bad position as far as freedom of speech and freedom of conscience, freedom of religion is
yeah.
concerned.
Okay, and you've previously spoken at the forum on the family that we hold in August. We've got Kiralee Smith, who's coming from Australia.
Uh,
She's currently in court because she's calling out dudes who are playing in girls' soccer teams. And of course, Lyle Shelton, our mate, who's head of the Family First political party in Australia, he's in court for calling out drag queens as inappropriate for kids. So is this another topic that in the election campaign the politicians don't want to go anywhere near because it's too moral and it's too tricky?
They do not want to go near it. They would say it's too moral and too tricky, but the reason that they don't want to go through it is that most Australians, if they hear Kiralee and if they hear Lyle, they are astounded at what's happening to them
Mm,
because
mm,
none of them would think that it's not unreasonable to say, Lyle,
yeah,
all Lyle has to do to get out of the court case is to apologise. But how can you apologise for
for
saying
telling the
that drag
truth.
queens are not suitable for children? How
Mm,
can you
mm,
apologise for that?
yeah,
So I'm just so proud to be a friend of Lyle Shelton and the way that
same.
he has just persevered through this, because certainly the process is a huge part of the punishment.
Yeah, yeah. Just before we look at the general sort of mainstream election issues, finally, I just wanted to ask. So the voice referendum was held last year. It was surprisingly defeated, which I think is good for racial unity. But has the racial issue been in the fore in this election for the federal election?
Look, it has been to a degree because, well, even just today, Penny Wong, one of our federal senators, so she has said something about the voice potentially coming back. And I think she gave sort of a timeline of 10 years. So it's not something that they're saying will come back in this next
Mm,
period of Parliament. But that has opened the whole conversation about the voice. And
mm,
people are saying, look, we've already voted on this. But the way that it's come up more is in the whole welcome to country. So, and on Anzac Day, people interrupted an Anzac Day service, which I really disagree with. So I don't agree with the process that happened because they booed and carried on when a welcome to country happened in the Anzac Day service, and I think that's
mm,
sad. But
yeah.
the outcome of that was that both leaders were asked. So Dutton and Albanese were asked, "What do you think about welcome to country?" And Dutton said, "It's overdone and it shouldn't be happening in Anzac Day services," whereas Albanese backed it in. So there's been a lot of polls, news polls, Courier Mail, one of our main newspapers here in Queensland, and overwhelmingly people are saying that it's overdone. So
Yeah.
that's been a really interesting thing. It's one of those sort of things that have come out of the woodwork all of a sudden that no one was expecting to happen, and it's
Mm,
because of these um, yeah, the protesters on Anzac Day. That's why it's raised its head. So it is an issue. People are um, getting worried about the increasing, I guess, effect on our children of being welcomed to their own country. They are worried about that aspect of it more than certainly. I don't think there's very few Australians who would not want to respect our Indigenous
mm,
Australians and show respect to them. But the concern is more what is this saying to our children, that they will never fully belong, they will never really be part of
mm,
this land? Is it always going to be
mm,
somebody else's land? So that's where it's coming from. And there's a number of Indigenous people who are saying the same thing, that it's overdone and it's become tokenistic, and it's become almost something that just is wrote at the beginning of
yeah.
something, and it means very little.
Yeah, almost divisive. Actually, I'm surprised it hasn't taken off here in New Zealand. I better not speak too loudly on that one. Look, we've covered the issues that the faith community, churches would be interested in, but in terms of an overall campaign, what have been the sort of top two or three issues that have been part of the campaign? I'm assuming that number one will be cost of living, because that seems to be the top issue in every country, but is it in Australia?
It is certainly one of the top three, probably the top. You're probably right. But one of the things that's come out has been the very clear definition, because the two major parties often are very similar in their policies, and it's hard to distinguish at times, which is a shame, because there should be more of a difference. But the one thing that has been really different between them has been their answer to energy. So Dutton is wanting to go nuclear, and that's a
Mm,
nuclear versus solar and wind turbines for this whole ecological sort of future.
mm,
Uh, so that has been a really big talking point. It's going to be interesting to see whether that backfires on Dutton. Certainly had a lot of pushback, but we've had a lot of people agreeing with it as well, and he's able to point to other nations. And so there's been that. Certainly the cost of living, and the cost of living plays into housing. So
mm,
it's very expensive to buy a house just about anywhere in Australia now. And we are really pricing our young people out of the Australian dream, which is to own your own home. So that's been big. Security's been big. Everybody seems to think that Dutton is better on security, but at the same time, Dutton is being lined up with American politics, and Australians are pushing back on that a little. They don't
trying to do a
like.
Canada thing. Yeah.
No, yeah, they would more do a Canada
Mm,
thing.
yeah.
Um, they would, so they
Mm,
they sort of react against Trump. And then there's also the Medicare is always a big thing as well. So
yeah.
that whenever it happens, it's Medicare and Mediscare,
Yeah.
because the Labor always say that the Conservatives are going to cut Medicare, and they never do.
Mm,
But it's always this
mm,
Mediscare campaign. So that's a word that's used quite a lot here.
yeah. The Greens, obviously, so the Greens have been reasonably strong in Australia, and then you had the Teal Greens, which were kind of I don't know, what do you call them? Slightly conservative Greens. But where are the Greens at, and where are the Teal Greens at? I think you made some comment just before we came on here that they're not going too well. They've gone too radical. I can't believe the Greens being radical. What's happening?
No, I know. The pushback has been quite strong. It's been an interesting thing to watch, because Australia is traditionally rural, and we love our farmers, we love our farms, and I know that that's the same in New Zealand. And I think the message is getting through that the Greens saying that they're all about conservation of
Mm,
nature, it's getting through that they're not actually, because none of the farmers don't vote for the Greens. The people who vote for the Greens live in units in the inner city Sydney and inner city Brisbane and Melbourne. It's
mm,
not the people who are actually on the land looking after the land. So that seems to be getting through. And the more radical things of the Greens. So the Greens just want to pay back every HEX debt. They want to do this, they want to do that. And of course, they'll never have to do it, because they'll never be in government. But I
yeah.
think the more radical sort of even social policies about
Yeah.
men and women, they can't say what a woman is. They push this gender ideology like crazy. So that sort of stuff is cutting through. And in every state election that we've had recently, the Greens have actually lost momentum. They've lost seats. So it would be really good to see if they do this federal election this coming weekend.
Yeah.
But the Teals are going to be an interesting thing too. A lot of people think they were sort of a one election wonder, and that
Mm,
they might also be wiped out this election, because they really haven't done anything. So They don't have enough people. Then there's not enough momentum, and there's nothing that you could point to and say, oh well, the Teals actually achieved that. Nothing's happened because of the Teals.
They were really just a protest to vote against Scott Morrison, weren't they? And people who just didn't want to vote Labor or your Labor.
Absolutely, and
Mm,
overwhelmingly women. And some of them were good. I felt some of them had potential to be good conservative
mm,
parliamentarians, but they can't do anything, and it becomes just protesting absolutely everything.
yeah.
They've been caught out a number of times. Different Teal candidates have been caught out, not completely
Mm,
telling the truth. Surprise, surprise about a candidate or a member of parliament, but there's just been a few scandals as well. So
mm.
the whole brand is a bit tarnished here at the moment.
Okay, well, just finally, let's just get your predictions in terms of, because you've got the preferential system. Is there any chance that we would see some of the minor parties in federal parliament, like Family First, One Nation, the Trumpet Party, whatever you called it?
Yeah. The Trumpet of Patriots is spending millions of dollars on gambling, on advertising.
Mm,
Gambling and advertising goes together in my head. The So every night, if like my generation still watches TV, a lot of younger people don't watch TV,
mm,
but the ads on TV for the Trumpet of Patriots are just ongoing. There's millions of dollars being spent. I don't know whether that will be enough to get them across the line because they're very new and they are very aligned to Trump.
right.
Family First are just this slow and steady growth. They are growing. I'm not confident that they will get in this time. It would be wonderful. But the sort of leadership that Lyle Shelton is giving is this ongoing, very steady, staying true to the message. So I feel quite I guess I'm hopeful that certainly by next election and even in some of the state elections for the upper house, Family First are going to be a force to be reckoned with in the future. I'm not
Yeah,
real confident for this weekend. One Nation have been around for a lot longer. I think that we might see them get up
yeah.
some of the places and there are still independent senators that are potentials as well. But our preferential system does help minor parties be able to get up, and that is a really good thing.
Okay, just finally, what are you predicting? And I'm going to text you on Sunday and play you back what you say right now. I mean, is it Albanese going to hang on to Prime Minister, or do you think Dutton can get up? I mean, looking at the polls from a third party, just looking over the Tasman, it looks like Albanese is going to get re-elected. Am I right?
That's certainly what it looks like. I'm a woman of prayer, so I am praying for a change of government. My biggest fear is a minority government, and who would be the ones who are then pulling the strings. If it was the Greens and Labor minority government, that would be the worst case scenario,
Mm,
and a
mm,
lot of people are predicting something like that.
yeah,
So my prayer is that we do have a change of government. I think we
mm.
really desperately need it in terms of all those conversations that we've just had, the freedom of religion, about the gender, all of that sort of stuff, the life issues. We're much in safer hands with a Conservative government here at the moment.
Although, sorry, just one last thing. Is Dutton a little bit like our own Prime Minister, whereas they come across as conservative, but when push comes to shove on the social conservative things, they run a mile? Is Dutton like that?
I don't think so. So I've met him
Mm,
personally quite a lot of times, and I don't feel like he just says what is the popular thing. I think he really says what he believes. I do think he is a conviction politician, which is what we want, isn't it, Bob? Like, even if we
mm.
disagree with somebody, we want them to be
Yeah.
a conviction
Yes.
politician. We want them to be there because they really believe something. I
Mm,
think Dutton is that person. Even the whole nuclear argument, and when he's made a statement and he believes that he's wrong, he's actually said, look, I got that wrong. I like
mm,
that as well. Whereas, Albanese fell off the stage and he said he didn't fall, and he finally had to say, yes, I fell. Like, even just silly things like that. Of course, if you fall, you fall,
yeah.
It
Yeah.
was ridiculous. So I think, I actually think Dutton is a man who sticks by his word. Mm.
Okay, we'll be watching with interest. But Wendy, thank you for that insight. That's very helpful. And yeah, we'll be praying for a good outcome for Australia as well. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks, everybody.